The proceeding will start shortly. 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 The proceeding will
Our inquiry into the use of plastic, especially single-use plastics, ways we can reduce and recycle more. So starting with Robin, if you'd like to introduce yourself for the record, please, who you are.
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for having us along today. My name is Robin Clark. I'm Director of Business Partnerships, Restaurant Services from Just Eat. Just Eat is a marketplace takeaway platform with over 100,000 restaurants globally. We have been working on helping restaurants to save money and to provide products and services for them. That's my role within Just Eat. As part of that, we've been leading on behalf of the 12 million customers in the UK to take action on plastic in the takeaway sector. I'm sure we can talk about that.
Thank you very much. Karen?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Karen Graley from Waitrose, and I'm responsible for packaging and the strategy and the targets that we have there, both internally and externally.
Good morning, Chair. I'm Stuart Lendrum, Head of Packaging Iceland. I'm responsible for ensuring that Iceland meets its ambition to be plastic-free by 2023. I've over 20 years' experience across packaging and sustainability within food manufacturing, packaging manufacturing and the retail sector, and was a founding member of the UK on-pack recycle labelling system over 10 years ago. And I'm currently also an ambassador for the Institute of Global Food Security at Queen's University Belfast, having originally graduated there in chemical engineering.
Right, okay. Looking at the graph yesterday, I saw that there's quite a lot of work to do in Iceland, really, to get the amount of packaging down. But of course, it's probably the nature of the business as well. So, you know, we're really looking into the whole nature of this inquiry, really, is to look at practical ways we can actually really make a difference. So both reducing plastic, also making sure that things are generally recyclable, compostable, and all those things. And of course, sometimes wrapping food, it's not always you can't always have compostable plastic to do it. But anyway, my first question is how much, and this is both to Stuart and Karen, how much food and drink packaging do you use annually, and how much of that is plastic? Who wants to start on that one?
We use just over 13,000 tonnes of plastic packaging, which is the majority of our packaging in total as a business.
Right, so 13 tonnes, and naturally you are looking at that very seriously.
We have a commitment to be plastic free on our Iceland products by 2023.
Yeah, but of course, like all these things, it's not just a case of committing to it. You've got to have sort of practical methods to get to that situation. So you've got your target.
Yeah.
I better not go into too much detail, because I think that's probably Alan's question. So I'll leave you to give the sort of detail of how you're going to get there. But I think what we are really interested in is not just targets, what you're going to do to get there. But I'll leave that to question two. So Karen, what about yourselves in Waitrose?
So currently we use 17,500 tonnes of plastic a year. That is total plastic for own label products, so not including branded products that we sell and place on the market. But that also includes the primary packaging, so that's the packaging that the customer takes home, but also the secondary packaging, so that's the packaging that's used to get the product from our distribution centres into our stores, and also the tertiary packaging, so that would be from our manufacturers through into our distribution centres as well. So that's the total plastic packaging that we use.
So if you as a company naturally decide to use less plastic, that will put pressure on your suppliers. What if your suppliers then turn around and say to you, well, of course, this will actually cost us more? How are you actually going to deal with that?
So, Mr Chairman, we have reduced our plastic consumption by 1,000 tonnes since 2017. So the figures for 2018 are the 17,500. And absolutely working with our suppliers in collaboration, that's how we've managed to achieve that 1,000-tonne reduction in primary packaging alone. In fact, in total, for all elements, it was 1,200 tonnes. But we have bared the cost where there has been an increase in the cost. For that, we haven't passed that on to our customer, and it's working with our suppliers to look at the best way to do that and how we can mitigate any of those additional costs through all of the touch points through the supply chain.
And you are probably expecting that other major retailers will do the same, because otherwise, if you're not careful, you become less competitive in the market. But probably Waitrose is at the higher end of the market. You're probably not quite so concerned, or what? I mean, Iceland would be a very competitive situation. I know you compete, but probably on a different type of customer.
Probably not appropriate for me to comment on some of our competitors, but it is obviously very important that we're competitive within the marketplace for our customers.
Because you see, what we found when we did an inquiry into sort of brand Britain is that people like to buy British, but as soon as the price sort of starts to go up, they get less enthusiastic. And I suspect while everybody naturally wants to use less plastics, they may not be keen necessarily paying for it. And I think that's going to be a sort of interesting way forward, and more that's absorbed through the system. And perhaps sometimes once we get to our new systems, they may not actually cost more. That's usually what happens. Now to Robin, how much plastic packaging is used by the takeaway food sector?
So, Mr Chair, in the takeaway sector in the UK, the main issue is twofold. We have the plastic pot that people typically have a wet curry delivered to them. We believe in the UK, again, data is very sparse in this area, and just to remind the committee, we don't manufacture or supply these plastic pots, but we believe there are about 500 million of those manufactured a year. That equates to around about 14,000 tonnes annually produced of these products. They are recyclable. The other issue in our sector is the foil, ketchup and plastic pots for dipping sauces.
Yeah.
Amazingly, globally, we have these numbers. Around about 16 billion of these are manufactured every year. And these are scary numbers. And of course, when you start to think about the recycling of those sachets, those are often going to be caked in ketchup or other such sauces, and therefore don't go through recycling.
That's right. I mean, is it plausible or possible to make those containers of biodegradable plastic, or will they biodegrade as the ketchup is in them?
So I think this leads to some of the action that we have taken in the sector. And when we occupy an unusual position, of course, because we don't manufacture, we can start to think about other materials that are available. And we actually steered away from composting because we know that, of course, there are not many composting units in the UK. And for today's recycling economy, we wanted to stay away from that and find something that truly did a new material. And so we found, we ran a global search to find new materials, worked with partners like the Sustainable Restaurant Association, and were invited to work with a company called Notpla, who have been manufacturing, you might have seen them, but seaweed sachets for water. And these sachets have been designed for water. We were able to convert them to transport ketchup and dipping sauces, and have run 2 such trials with those sachets. And they've been fantastic. The customer feedback has been really positive. 92% said they wanted to see more and were able to use them as easily as a foil sachet. And when we visited number 11 to give evidence, we talked about wanting to run this sort of innovation and said that we needed innovation in this sector. They were very, very helpful and very supportive, and when we applied for a UK Innovate grant, they have granted us a grant for phase 3 of the trial. And we're now trying to scale this as quickly as possible with multiple restaurants, also with partners from the FMCG world who can provide manufacturing know-how, expertise, and machines as well.
Right, okay, thank you very much. We'll leave that there. Question number 2, Alan, please.
Thanks, Neil. Just ask the panel, so what efforts are you making to reduce plastic packaging in terms of units, rather than just making the packaging lighter, and what you're doing to source alternate materials for single-use plastics? So maybe start with Robin. You obviously touched on one product there, but...
Thank you, Alan. So the other area that we're also looking at is the 500 million plastic pots that are used every year, and on the seaweed front, we've been able to take that alginate and spray it to a cardboard, and that actually washes out through the recycling process. So if it escapes the waste stream, it will degrade much quicker than the 600 years that plastic perhaps would take. And we've been able to roll it, apply it onto these materials, and we're hoping to see trials on that in literally the next few weeks. So we're very excited about that route. One of the other partnerships that we're also looking at is with an additive manufacturer that has designed a biotransformation process to convert plastic into water, CO2 and biomass. This is not oxy-recycling, this is not biodegradation, this is a biotransformation. It's in early stages, in an imperial setup, and so we're very excited about trialling that with the manufacturer of the plastic boxes.
Okay, thanks. Karen?
So, yes, Mr Brown, we have, as I mentioned, we've reduced plastics in the last year by 1,200 tonnes in totality, and we're continuing to do that. Our data set until last year didn't go down into the different polymer types, whereas now working in collaboration with the UK Plastic Pact and RAP, we have a greater data set that we can better analyse. So we are currently working through what our plastics reduction target will be in conclusion with our targets to 2023. So we will be making a public statement around that, but I don't have that for you today.
Can I just ask what the timescales will be for that then? Because obviously if you're still doing that analysis, and then it's not long to 2023 to get to that point where you're saying you won't have plastic. So.
So we're not saying that we won't have plastics, but what we are saying is that we will reduce the plastics, and that will be by 2023. To achieve the widely recycled, reusable and home compostable commitment that we have by 2023, we need solutions for all of our own label lines by the end of next year. So that's what we're currently working through at the moment. So that will be every category, every product, whether it be a wet or dry good, we will have to fit one of those criteria. We're also, similarly to Robin, working very closely with a number of manufacturers around alternatives as well to plastic materials, but also ensuring that, where they then go to and once they're placed on the market, they don't cause greater harm than what it is that we're trying to resolve. So we do agonise over the decision of placing those on the market. So that's why our commitment has been around home compostability as opposed to compostability, because there is a significant difference at the moment. And what we do encourage is obviously infrastructure to be developed and continue to be developed and grow for conventional composting or industrial composting, so that then actually the threshold can be broadened for that. So we have our ready meal trays as an example. We have on the market now, with just in one cuisine at the moment, remove the plastic. That will save 150 tonnes in that one cuisine alone, and we're looking to roll that out. That will take time because it is a totally new development to the market, and we'll have no plastic within there. It will be widely recycled and also home compostable. And then also we've been working on the latest developments is with a collaboration with a company called Quantec that you may be aware of, where we're looking at utilising the waste from langoustine shells to make a material as well. But again, ensuring that when it reaches the waste stream, it does not contaminate and cause greater issues. So there are a number of initiatives like that we're working on at the moment.
If I could just, Kerry just wants to make a quick point on this, and then you carry on.
Can I just ask, do you still use black plastic for any of your ready meals or some of the higher end things like asparagus and that, because that's obviously very difficult to recycle?
Yes, absolutely. So we made a commitment in January of 2018 that we would remove all black plastic from our business by the end of 2019. I'm pleased to say that for 2018 last year we removed black plastic from all of our fruit and veg and our meat, and this year we will be out of black plastic in totality. So the biggest area, biggest challenge here.
Confident, because you say 2019, we're into 2019 now, so
absolutely.
You're confident by the end of the year the black plastic will be gone?
Absolutely, Chairman, yes.
All right. Okay, carry on then.
Can I just ask you, you mentioned about products being home compostable rather than just definition of compostable. So what does that mean in reality for home composting, and what conditions need to be there for the product to properly break down and, into a natural form?
Of course. So the conditions need to be, I suppose there are three routes of, say, we don't like to use the term disposal because we don't like to think that of anything as waste these days. However, there are three routes that our customers can take for the next journey of that material, be it home compostable. One is if they have a home compost facility at home. The temperatures of that need to be maintained to around about 40 degrees centigrade. So the mix and the material that goes into that facility need to be carefully managed. And from the information that we're provided, it means that you can only have up to 25% of actually a packaging material within that mix for it to work and break down. That will break down within 36 weeks, so it's quite a long process for it to break down in totality. And as Robin mentioned earlier, it's about the bio and the organisms to reduce that so that we end up with nothing, and there's no residue and there's no microplastics that are left as residue either, and that all it would leave would be actually something that will enhance the soil. Then the other route is that you could use that for what we like to call for food waste. So our banana bag that we launched earlier in the year, which is home compostable, we clearly mark on there for customers to reuse that bag to then have for food waste caddy liner, so it goes through into anaerobic digestion. So again, ensuring it's not going into a good recycling stream. Working with the local authorities, there is then the other route of disposal for this is into garden waste. We're not encouraging that publicly at the moment because we don't believe that the facilities want to take that material, but that is something that we are working on collaboratively and also with the UK Plastic Pact. So there are three routes to market for that material.
Could I just ask quickly again on that, Chair? So you correctly said putting it in conventional garden waste you wouldn't want, so how do you get a clear message out to people or to customers that this is suitable for home composting, which almost by extrapolation then many people would assume, well, I can just put that into my garden waste. So how are you going to actually make that work in practice?
So on the we have two products that we have placed on the market this year, the home compostable. As I mentioned earlier, we agonise over what we place on the market to ensure that it's not going to do greater harm than what it is we're trying to resolve. So on our banana bag, we have literally repeated home compostable bag over the whole of the bag. So it is very clear for the customer to see that it is different. And then we also clearly mark on the bag that it can be used as a food waste caddy liner so that it goes through into anaerobic digestion. We're not telling customers to put it in with their garden waste at the moment. Okay.
Yes, Chair, do you want to comment?
Yeah. So our commitment is to be plastic free and to move out of plastic. So when we talk about the fact that we've reduced and taken 1,500 tonnes out of plastic, that's about moving out of plastic. And in terms of what does that look like in terms of that journey to 2023? Well, on those things that are already called out as difficult to recycle, and those problematic plastics. By October of this year, we'll no longer use PVC. By December of this year, we'll no longer have black plastic and be using black plastic. And also by December of this year, we will be down to 6 products still using polystyrene, which is the other plastic that's been called out as problematic. So we're making real progress. We've a lot to do. It's a real challenge to move out of plastic, but we are making progress.
Okay, so you've got your own roadmap, your own targets for 2023. Is there a reason why Iceland haven't signed up to the UK Plastics Pact?
We are really supportive of ensuring that plastic is recyclable, contains recycled content, all the targets and ambition of the UK Plastics Pact, but our ambition goes beyond that and is about moving out of plastic. So because our ambition goes really far beyond it, and for us it's not about recyclability of plastic, it's about what are the alternatives to plastic. From a resource point of view, that's where we focus our attention as opposed to on the Plastic Pact, which is focused on plastics.
Okay, so you're saying from an Iceland perspective, your targets are more ambitious than what's in the Plastics Pact?
More ambitious in the context of moving out of plastic, but not mutually exclusive.
Okay. And Sheriff, can I just ask, so within the Plastics Pact, Target 2 is 100% of plastics packaging to be reusable, recyclable or compostable. Target 3 is 70% of plastic packaging effectively recycled or composted, so presumably that means there are 30% being reused. How do you define and monitor the reuse of plastic? I'll give you an example. Trying to keep plastic bags out of circulation, but many people, once you buy a plastic bag, they might use it as a bin liner, so you're reusing it once and then it's still going to landfill. So how do you monitor the reuse and actually know that it's not just ending up back in landfill? I don't know if, obviously Emily can comment.
Unless my colleagues correct me, there is no clear measure for that at the moment, and that is something that we have fed back through the recent consultations for both DEFRA and government, and also for HMT as well with the plastic tax. It's something that we have said would need to be in place, certainly for us to enable to deliver the plastic tax and to have a minimum of 30% recycled content in all plastic goods going forward. So it is something that would need to be put in place. It's very difficult because of the recycling system and the processes that are used. It goes back to its molecular structure. So actually the polymer, you cannot detect a recycled polymer, unless there's some greater mind than mine, a recycled polymer versus a virgin polymer, and then when you put those two together, that's, I don't believe there's a solution for that at the moment.
I think what I would say to that is if you look at the level of collaborative activity, the level of investment in research and development across packaging in general, including plastics, and what you'll see is huge amounts of activity around recyclability and recycled content, and actually there is relatively not a huge amount of activity on reuse, and reuse is one of those areas where there is a real need actually to seed and stimulate more activity, more collaboration. It's a completely undeveloped system within the UK, whether it be plastic or any other material.
I think the takeaway sector is an interesting one for reuse. This is why we act. We have 12 million frequent customers who want us to take action. We ran a plastics hackathon at Imperial College, and there were 2 proposals which were really well thought through proposals around reuse of takeaway boxes. But both of those struggle on the economics, because what you end up doing is putting an entire new infrastructure around something, which inevitably brings cost into the product. Never mind the legislation and health and hygiene of the reusing of those boxes. So it's a huge challenge, and that's why we looked beyond that to try and find a new material.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, sir.
I mean, I think one of the issues for me is that because you've got sort of the plastics that are now made from, traditionally from mineral oil, and then you've got the compostable plastic that are maybe made from starch. You don't want to actually mix the two together because you contaminate both. And I think, always it's trying to make sure the consumer knows what he or she is going to do with that. And I think that's a challenge for all of us, government, councils, but also for you as retailers, and so what can you do to be absolutely certain? Because, like I said, You see, food waste could be not food waste, but food packaging used for food, as long as it doesn't biodegrade while it's in that. A biodegradable plastic would work quite well, because you then actually put it into a industrial type composting, which includes organic waste to get the temperature up, so you can mix it all together, whereas you don't want that then to go into a mineral plastic situation, and because you've got to get the food residue off. So I don't know how much detail you've gone into actually looking at making sure that the information you put onto the packaging, the consumer will understand it. Who wants to have a shot at that?
Iceland is a member of the on-pack recycle labelling system.
Right.
The on-pack recycle labelling system has nearly 400 business members across the UK using a consistent, harmonised labelling system on pack to outline what is and what isn't recyclable. Right. In the government consultations, they've highlighted the need and the potential for mandatory labelling. Moving to a mandatory labelling system which is consistent for everybody, really important. The other thing we've committed within that is, in the current labelling system, it's a three-way labelling system, so it's either not yet recyclable, widely recyclable, or check locally to deal with that variance in infrastructure. That ultimately doesn't help consumers, because what people want to know is yes or no, can I recycle that? So there's a real challenge to an opportunity to move to a binary system, make it mandatory, make sure that that's harmonised with local authority communication, so you've got one consistent communication piece right the way through the journey. Right. And then the final thing is that there is still a real opportunity on further enforcement on green claims legislation, because there is still a lot of other information on pack that purports to make claims about its recyclability that just cause confusion. Okay,
I'll let the other witnesses, you may answer the question. I think I've strayed into question number 7, so you'll have an opportunity to answer then. So can I have David, please, with question number 3 now?
Thank you, Chairman. Also, can I remind members of my interest in the agri-food business in Northern Ireland? The Chairman has sort of touched on this question as well in regards to food waste, but how are you balancing reductions in the plastic packaging with managing food waste? Anyone?
Okay. Sorry, Mr. Simpson. Absolutely. Anything that we do where we look to make a change will also take into account looking at the food waste and also the shelf life of that product. Yeah. So we will not place anything on the market that would be detrimental to the product quality, the safety of that product, and also the shelf life of that product. And so we work very hard to do that. So, for instance, we had some developments around a sandwich pack about probably a year ago now, where we had done some developments where we've made it easier to remove the two materials that make that pack, so the plastic and a very small layer and then the cardboard, so it's easier to recycle and separate the materials. But then we wanted to take it to the next stage and look at actually utilising a home compostable material as well, being mindful that sandwich skillets can become litter quite easily. So we wanted to look at what developments were there. In doing that, we actually reduced the shelf life of the product by 75%. So needless to say, we didn't place that piece of packaging on the market because it would have been detrimental and would have increased food waste significantly.
Is there any truth that white plastic is better for food shelf life?
White plastic. I've not heard that white plastic or indeed any other.
Yes, I understand some time ago the Food Standard Agency had done a report and they indicated that there was longer shelf life and would help obviously with food waste.
In terms of plastics, anything like that will just be driven by absorption of UV and UV degradation, which is typically, in reality, actually, when you're in a chilled cabinet in a retailer, actually it's the light in the cabinet as opposed to UV that is the dominant source of light. UV is often a misnomer in terms of food waste.
To go back, Karen, you mentioned earlier that in order to get to the targets that you're indicating, that you're working closely with your suppliers within the industry, and I've declared that I have an interest in that. When it comes to the industry, certainly in Northern Ireland, have been indicating that they're looking at reusable packaging. Now, not recycling, but as customers come in, they get a plastic bag. Instead of that, they're taking a more expensive bag and they can reuse that. And the industry is looking at moving forward with some kind of packaging where customers can come in with their packaging to get their meat, to try and cut down on the plastic use. Has Waitrose or Iceland or anyone looked at that or engaged in that?
Absolutely, Mr Simpson. So in April last year, we changed our policies internally so that at all of our counters within all of our stores, customers could bring in their own vessels to actually purchase from the counters, whether that be meat or fish, or from the delicatessen or for cheeses. All we asked our customers was to ensure that those containers were clean and it had a lid to obviously stay on there. So we started that in April last year. We didn't publicise that greatly because we wanted to just give customers the choice, and it was also based on our experience with customers that a number of our customers had asked us over the years, could they bring in their own vessels to purchase from the counters. Since then, we have launched a small trial, which we're in week 5 of, at our Botley Road store for Unpackaged. And during that, we're experimenting with a number of, shall we say, reusable and returnable vessels as well for customers.
Okay, Iceland involved in?
We work really closely with our suppliers, and Northern Ireland's a good example where actually you've got, there's a really innovative supply base actually looking at the cutting edge of a lot of things around both moving out of plastics and reuse.
Yeah, of course.
It's really interesting seeing new businesses coming through to us on reuse as an area. As I said earlier, it's completely underdeveloped versus all the other activity, and the challenge for us is there's a lot of high-end activity at the moment on reuse because it's easier to make reusable packaging and sell it almost as a premium offering. And the challenge is, from an Iceland point of view, we've got to democratise that and bring that down to something everybody can access, something that works economically for our customers on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to being a more premium offer. So that's our area of interest. But generally, it's an area of innovation at the moment, but there's not a huge amount yet on the market.
Okay, and lastly, as regards the cost, because the industry always says the supermarkets screw them into the wall when it comes to pricing and all the rest of it. Is there a balance in this between the supermarkets and retailers with the processors, that there's a shared cost if there is more cost to be initiated?
So regarding cost, I mean, whilst it's we're only in week 5 at the moment regards that, so there's still an awful lot for us to learn. Whilst we've learned much already, I can assure the committee of that. The burden has not back through the supply chain with our suppliers. So again, when we talk about working collaboratively, that's what we genuinely mean. We're working collaboratively, and the cost of the goods that we are selling loose at the moment, on average, is 15% less than what the pre-packed costs would be. Now, of course, what we need to be able to learn and understand is the volumes that are required, so that then what the sizes and the scale of what comes into our stores, and this is where the operational efficiencies and distribution supply chain, obviously we need to work with to make sure that we get that right, so we can optimise that, so therefore we can mitigate any of those additional costs going forward. It's just a very different way to trade and to be a grocery retailer.
I appreciate that. Appreciate it. Robin, anything to add to that to finish?
I think the only thing we'd add from a marketplace is that the 30,000 restaurants that we work with on the platform, they're small, medium enterprise, often family-owned businesses, and what's great is that we often see innovation coming through from them. Reuse, as I said earlier, is very difficult, but the one thing we've seen at the moment is a reused metal box for a pizza, which is, it's too early to look at scaling, but these are some of the ideas that start to come through.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much.
Just on vacuum packing of food, because that extends the life, doesn't it? So, is there any reusable or any compostable type plastics that can be used for vacuum packing? Because we are very conscious in this inquiry. We don't want to push up food waste by using less plastic. We want to use less plastic. So, what's the situation? Has there been much research done on it, or what?
I think the first area of innovation you'll see coming through in what's sort of commonly talked about as either vacuum packing or skin packing will be the introduction of two things: A, recyclable materials, and B, composite materials, where you move away from being wholly plastic based into typically plastic paper composites. So I think we'll see a reduction in plastic and an increase in the recyclability of materials. They're the
I mean,
main
these
innovation
materials are
areas.
going to have to be airtight, aren't they, by their sort of very nature, really?
Completely, and that's why the sort of the natural process in that context is about achieving recyclability and about reducing the overall level of plastic and moving into composites.
And you see, the challenge, isn't it, is to have a product that is either all recyclable or compostable. You don't want a mixture of both, do you? Because then, unless I suppose you can separate it when you use it. But you know, this is the issue for me, is that if you start to mix them together, you're almost worse than where you started, really. And I think that's a challenge. Would you accept that?
I think, if I can, if the colleagues agree, I think what we looked for is actually to stay away from the compostability issue. And if we could design a new material, so take the plastic box, that's why we've gone for a card box with a seaweed alginate liner that goes through the existing recycled network, so that we hopefully deal with the two issues. We can recycle the box, but if it escapes the waste stream, it degrades much quicker.
Yeah.
And we know that compostability at the moment is not, the infrastructure is not there to deal with the issue.
No.
And also, you know, do the composters maintain the level of heat required consistently enough to deal with those issues? So that's why we went for that.
And does the material completely break down that you can then actually grow flowers or put it on the land to grow crops, you see? And these are the issues. It's got to be properly compostable and break right down. And that's what we've got to be convinced of, I think.
And that's where we're looking at this new biotransformation process, which breaks the carbon rings and is not even, we're not calling it compostability. In fact, some of the things we're starting to think about is, do we actually label the packaging with a recycle by date as opposed to a use by? Because then again we could start to help customers understand that they need to do something with that packaging by a defined date. Fits to current.
What do we just say?
Point,
What do we just say? And all of that is it's easy to end up oversimplifying it as a discussion about compostable plastics and recyclable plastics. If you stood back from it, you'd say fundamentally the challenge we have is we've too big a range of materials. And that makes whatever we're doing with them really complex, both from a point of view of sorting them out, dealing with contamination risks, and actually making the next stage of the process economically viable. The sheer range of materials we have, it's not so much an issue about compostable versus non-compostable. It's just about the range of materials, particularly in the context of plastic.
We've got to be careful that you as in the retail industry, just got to be careful that we don't actually promote something as either compostable or recyclable, but in the end it doesn't really happen, you see, because it's a case of ticking the box. We all feel better, but in reality, are we better? Like a lot of our recycling didn't actually recycle here, it all got sent to China. All of these things, you know, we're trying to look at in this inquiry at something that will be really practical, so hence why you're getting those questions. So Cheryl, you question number 4 now, please.
Yeah, can I turn to cost? Some people sort of believe that loose vegetables, for instance, cost more than prepackaged vegetables. Why is it cheaper to buy fruit and veg prepackaged in plastic?
Shall I take that?
Yeah.
I think certainly from our experience with the Botley Road trial at the moment, still in its infancy of course, we are not experiencing that to purchase loose product is more costly than pre-packed. I would say, again, thinking about the experiences and the change that would need to happen through the supply chain and operationally, that's where the cost would be incurred. So if we think about, if we take a pack of peppers, for instance, typically you may buy a pack of 3, they could be all different colours, so it's offering the customer the choice and the variety as well, and then the convenience of buying that one. To actually manage that through the supply chain, the back of branch, if you could imagine, then they're all loose. They're being contained in a larger container. There may be a liner that goes with that. There could then be another liner that goes on the top of that when you have a crate on top of another crate. So that's, I think, where some of the extra cost, I think, historically have been barred or brought about for loose products. It's just about the manhandling of that, and also the stock rotation as well. As they're not date labelled, it's then about the manpower and the labour that's required to check the quality of that, whether it be a fruit or vegetable in this instance, to make sure that it's being sold at its best and that we're rotating in the right way to mitigate any food waste. So I think that's probably where some of the cost has been bared in the past. And it's also then for us actually to consider how we then share storage information with our customers as well, where we remove away the packaging, which again is one of the things that we're learning, and has been very constructive feedback from our customers on the Botley Road trial. But it's how then we convey those other important messages around minimising food waste and storage and usage, in addition to not having any packaging there.
Do you think that sometimes if it's pre-packaged, though, it can contribute to food waste as well? Because, for instance, if I wanted 2 carrots, I may very often have to go into a supermarket and buy a bag full of carrots. And possibly I'm just using that over the weekend, I go away, and that creates more food waste. So does that get taken into account as well?
So typically in an average store for Waitrose, we would have a number of loose fruit and vegetable items. Also the counters that I've also referenced as well. So if a customer wanted to purchase 1 beef burger or 2 sausages, then that would be the opportunity to be able to do that. So we offer that choice where customers may want to buy more regularly and in more smaller portions. So I don't believe it would drive the cost.
Have you got anything to add?
Yeah, what I would have said that from an Iceland point of view, actually our produce offer is a pre-packed offer as opposed to a combined loose and pre-packed offer, and because of our heritage in frozen food, we typically, that we're very proud of actually encouraging our shoppers to use frozen as a way to both buy and manage and be able to only use what they need. So that's our approach.
Have you got anything to add to that?
I don't think there's one for us, but thank you.
I mean, why is it that, you see, haven't we got to sort of really change our whole philosophy? Because, you see, plastic has got, in your packaging, you take it to a factory, you put it in plastic bags, it's all done, a lot of it's done by machinery, then you put it on a pallet, you very often then shrink wrap the whole thing, you put it on a lorry and you take it to the big retailers. It all works really well because it's very cost effective, but it uses a lot of plastic. So, we've sleepwalked, haven't we, into using more and more plastics, and we've got to sleep. We've got to wake up and come out again. And I think, I'm not sure that you are quite sort of getting to grips with the whole process, because it suits you very well to buy very cheaply. Because the cost of processing through mechanical, putting into bags, then putting on the pallets, coming to the big retailers, it works very well from a financial point of view, but it doesn't work very well for the amount of plastics used. So, to what extent are you saying, to what extent when a pallet arrives to Iceland or arrives to Waitrose, to what extent are you looking at that to see how much plastic's wrapped on the pallet, how much is then wrapped in your carrots and your potatoes or anything else that won't necessarily need to be in plastic bags? How much are you actually challenging that? Because I think there's an awful lot of it, because I think better than recycling and reusing, would be better not to use it in the first place. So how much are you trying to not use plastic in the first place?
So absolutely, Mr. Chairman, we are looking to reduce and remove wherever possible, not just in the items that our customers take home, but also, as I mentioned earlier, about the kind of secondary and the tertiary packaging elements that are used within the supply chain as well. So we haven't only just removed and reduced plastic packaging for primary, we have also made a reduction in what comes into our distribution centres, and then also from the distribution centre into our stores as well. We use cages typically from our distribution centres through into our stores, so they're obviously reusable small vehicles in a way, rather than adding further plastic and packaging to that. all of the plastics and the cardboard and the waste that we have within our distribution centres or at the back of our stores are also collated, and they're baled and they are recycled too, at our expense. So we ensure that they go in the right places to be dealt with in the most appropriate way. So what we will not do is place a product on the market for the consumer to reduce the amount of packaging or indeed plastics used at the detriment of somewhere else within the chain. We look at that all the time to make sure that it's not going to be detrimental anywhere else.
Does Iceland do the same?
Well, it's exactly with what you've described in mind is why we've got a commitment to be plastic free. Okay. And the reality is we work right the way through the supply chain because...
But you get my argument. It's all very well to say you're going to be plastic free, but you've got to have a... government can sign up to any target it likes, but it's got to actually have a method of getting there.
And it's only by understanding the relationships and interdependency of all that material through the supply chain that you can get on that journey to being plastic free. So we look at the whole thing, and actually, going back to one of the earlier questions and points, in the supply chain, that probably is the big area in the UK where reuse is really prevalent. It's the big part of the sector where actually reusable packaging is the norm. So lots of lessons there in terms of driving through reuse on one hand, but equally we look at every single piece of packaging, every single material, all of that plastic all the way through, because it's only by understanding that we'll get to plastic free at a product level.
Okay. Kerry, please, question number...
Okay, we've sort of touched on this a little bit about reusable packaging and things. I think you sort of said about the tin pizza box and so on, but could I ask how consumers have responded to some of the initiatives? I think Iceland's got a deposit return scheme, hasn't it? And Waitrose has been looking at refillable options. So just, where do you... My perception would be there'll be a sort of small proportion of customers that perhaps will respond to that and be organised enough to do that. But it's like, how do you get past that first tranche and make it more widely acceptable? So perhaps,
we were the first retailer to start trialling deposit return schemes, and we were taken aback by not only the response to it, but actually the consistent response that says over time it hasn't tailed off. So by the end of May, start of June of this year, we will have taken back in over 750,000 plastic bottles.
Wow.
Which is phenomenal. Really proud of that, and the customers have absolutely bought into it. But what we've seen is that we sit at a consistent level of what's coming back, and it's settled down, and it's become part of what people do. And I think that's a challenge for us, and we see it as, how does this become normal? How do we make this just part of what everybody does? So our evidence so far, we've shared it with government as part of the consultation process, is that it really works. We're hugely supportive of deposit return.
And how much do you give them per bottle?
We're giving them 10p.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the things that's still to be set within the scheme. And that's the difference. One of the things we will see in the work that's being done in deposit return. So at the moment, that's not a deposit return; it's just reward.
Right.
And the challenge for us is to make it to introduce a system that sets the deposit at the right level and in such a way that it's valued enough, to encourage take back.
Okay. And with Waitrose, you've got refillable options in some stores. I think that might be a bit more challenging.
Well, certainly it's been very encouraging for the short time that's been available to our customers. Certainly in the Botley Road experience that we have. At the moment, we have customers, actually 50% of our customers are already reusing packaging, so they're bringing back their own containers already. So just in a 4-week period, 50% of the customers are reusing. So I think there's a great desire and aspiration for customers to be able to do that. And in talking to some of the customers in store as well, personally, where they may have 11 or 12 different pieces of packaging that they've brought in, a lot of them they haven't purchased from us. So some of them are actually reusing maybe ice cream tubs or a butter carton as well. So they're actually being quite creative in how they're doing that. So as long as anything that is resealable, the customers are at liberty to bring those in and refill them.
And then it's done by weight. How do you factor in the weight of the the container that they've brought back with you? Because presumably that's how it's done, that you weigh what they've bought.
Yeah, so what we call it is the tur weight of the packaging. So what we ask, we've tried to keep it as simple as possible for customers, because again, it's a very different way of shopping for many customers, is that they would put the container that they're using, whether it be their own or one that they're purchasing from us or one that they're borrowing from us, they would put that on the scale. It would then come up with what the weight and the price for that weight is. They then put that sticker onto the container. They would then select which product they're using, they'd like to buy, whether it be a frozen item, we've got a selection of frozen goods, or whether it be some dried goods like pasta or a pulse, or indeed coffee. And then they would literally pop that, this little vessel of tap that you can turn to get to the quantity that they would like. They can pop that back on the scale. So if you're looking for a recipe for ingredients, then you can check the amount that you're having. So to your point earlier, you can buy exactly the amount that you require rather than more. And then you literally would then detract the initial cost with your pack to the cost of your goods. So you're only paying for the cost of goods, not for the cost of the packaging. So that's sorted out of the till? They Absolutely, know how to do It's very straight. I've probably made it sound more complex than it is actually, so apologies. But it is very straightforward. It's literally a 3-step process for customers. So literally weigh the empty container, place the goods in, reweigh it, and then you pay.
And how does it work for the frozen products then? Because they must, if they're in a freezer, do they not have some sort of packaging on them already? Because otherwise everything would stick together, wouldn't they? So the products they're loose at the moment. So what we have is kind of like large trays that probably what you'd find in more wholesale. So we've got some strawberries, we've got some mangoes, we've got some raspberries and cherries that customers can use with a scoop to select. They don't all stick together, because like if you get a pack of frozen peas, sometimes you have to bash them quite a bit to get all the peas to separate. But
I think that's due to
maybe that's my experience.
Temperature control, actually.
Is it right?
So,
okay.
No, the customers love it, and actually the replenishment has been far greater than we initially anticipated.
And that's in the Oxford store at the moment.
In the Oxford store at the moment.
So what are your plans to roll that out?
So
you said it's been 4 weeks so far. So
4 weeks at the moment. We're looking to trial that through to 11 weeks, so we have some really good qualitative and quantitative research and insight and feedback from our customers, and then we'll look to see what are the next steps for that, but also bearing in mind we don't want any detrimental or unassociated waste with products, whether being loose, and also thinking about how we then get those products through to a greater number of stores.
And with contamination, so in Parliament we've had a bit of a plastic-free Parliament process, but in terms of us taking away meals from the restaurants and that, there's been resistance for anyone bringing their own containers or like tiffins or something like that on health and safety, and hygiene grounds. So the fear is and I think there's a bit of a concern at the moment about people wanting their keep cups refilled without having washed them out properly. So how do you, if someone was to bring in a container that wasn't pristine, how would you deal with that if somebody, is there a risk of food poisoning or, hygiene issues?
It's a very good question. So one of the things that we have trained our partners to do in those instances from back in April last year on the counter is, should a container not look clean, then we would offer to maybe rinse or wash that container for the customer.
Okay, and so I suppose in terms of scaling it up, you're both looking at scaling it up, and you think that this is worth doing. Is that the
absolutely? I think the feedback and take up from customers has been overwhelming. We just need to ensure that we implement it in the right way. I think obviously everybody would appreciate you do something for one store is far easier than actually then rolling that out to 300 400 and different store formats as well.
I'm just going to let Caroline and Cheryl in quickly, and then you carry on.
How would you deal with food allergies in that instance? I'm thinking peanut allergies, pulse allergies, maybe something would get mixed up. And I mean, we've heard a lot in the news about not labelling correctly because of food allergies, but surely you might have cross-contamination.
So the products that we have chosen at the moment, we have over 200 items that are selling loose in that one store for this trial. We have specifically selected those products so that there is no risk of contamination or allergen. So there are no peanuts or anything like that at the moment. That's a greater challenge for us as we would look to scale that. As we all know, it's a very complex issue. But by starting with coffee beans, with some pasta, we can gauge customers' appetite for that, also allow them then to experience that and that change in behaviour and how they shop. Thank you.
I'm just wondering about the practicality, because it sounds like it works really well if the person that comes in is awake, concentrating, switched on and focused on what they're doing. But for me, sometimes I go to the supermarket late at night or with 3 children, and there is a significant chance that I will put the container full of food before I remember that I was supposed to have weighed it before I filled. And then I can't tip it back because I'm getting contaminated. I can't then weigh. I wonder how you manage that. And also, if somebody does with allergens, if somebody does put items that they pick up, fruit or whatever, into a plastic packet that they haven't cleaned properly, that has got some sort of allergenic material in it they've put in their packet before, which is something you can't really control for. And it's actually, I didn't need 4 of them, I only need 3, or the kids put one in, and they put it back. How do you protect those people? So the logistics of it. It sounds great when everyone does it properly, but the reality is people won't.
I think Caroline could mess up your system, I think, here.
Well, so am I. We're thinking about the data. The Waitrose is quite expensive.
We might like to go and try it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But,
we'll send Caroline in to test it, I think.
Marvellous. No, absolutely. One of the things that we have done here is we have more partners in those areas. So in the refillable station, as we call it at the moment, we have more partners on hand there to help customers with that. Interestingly about time and having young children with you, one of the customers that I spoke to, she had 2 little girls, and I just said, do you mind me asking, how are you managing with this? How is it working? Because she literally had 8 containers with her, and the little girls were interacting with mum. It didn't take her any longer. She was very happy, and she also commented on the cost of goods as well. That was very reasonable. So I think it's just about that change in behaviour. It may take a little longer at first. I think it's a little bit like our, taking our carrier bags with us, reusable bags rather, when we go shopping. It's just one of those things that we become accustomed to.
Okay, thank you. Just before we leave this question, Stuart, you talked about, I think, was it 750,000 bottles, I think you had back. What I'm interested in is what you actually do with those bottles, because the whole idea of a deposit scheme and return is to try and make the same bottle out of the bottle that's returned. Hence, some companies have got reverse vending machines. So it's not just about you collecting those bottles. What do you actually do with them when you've got them?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the benefits of that deposit return approach is that you're collecting really high quality, consistent material, so you know that you've
and
got.
And do you make the same bottle again, or what?
Well, we're not in a position to sort of dictate that. But what we're in a position to do is to get it back into the PET food recycling stream. It's food grade, really good quality PET. It's able to go back into food grade PET recycling.
Right, because that's the key to this, to make sure that it doesn't go into the sort of normal recycling of plastic, which is a very low grade, isn't it? So the whole idea of not only just making us feel good about returning the bottle, but that you actually do something positive with that.
Yeah.
And I think customers are going to need to be reassured on this, so that they don't think they're just sort of doing it for the sake of it, really.
And that comes back to that point about whenever you have lots of different types of plastics and lots of contamination, all of that just makes it harder and reduces them. Versus, I know we're collecting PET bottles, all food grade, all really good, actually really easy to do the right thing with it.
Fine. Okay, Caroline, now your question.
Thank you. My question is about plastic tax, which I think you alluded to a little bit earlier. Do you think plastic tax is a good idea?
And from our point of view, anything that encourages both people to consider other options than plastic and ensuring people are using plastic or recycled content are a good thing. I think the challenge is that on its own, it's not enough. It's, for us, we want to see that plastics tax come through at the right level, so it drives behaviour change. But equally, we want to see more investment, more activity around industry collaboration on alternatives to plastic. We've got to do both, as opposed to just taxing one. Actually, we've got to work on the alternatives at the same time.
Okay, Robin?
We would support Stuart's point. I think the consultation that we've been involved in and we've written a submission on is the right approach. However, there are some flaws with that consultation at the moment. Of course, as Karen alluded to earlier, actually being able to vet whether the 30% recycled content, we don't see a way to do that at the moment. And also, given that we're all talking about packaging food safety is an issue. We can't package recycled content. And possibly another major issue is that there wasn't an actual number put on the tax. So we can't actually estimate what the impact was. Now, if that tax was applied, even at some arbitrary level, certainly within our industry, where it is extremely competitive and small, medium businesses trading on tight margins, that tax will end up feeding through to the customer in the end, and which of course is not the desired approach. It's exactly the right approach is to start with tax, but again, just rooting back to our approach, we've got to try and find alternatives. We can't recycle our way out of the issue.
So that was really the second half of the question: is will it actually change your behaviour any more than you already sound like you're trying to, or will it just cost the consumer more to buy their food?
So I think I'd say we're probably all actively looking to use recycled content where we can. So take, for instance, the bottle that Stuart's been talking about. Typically, you would find between 30 and 50% recycled content in those bottles already. And that's probably around about a good recycling rate for what is recycled currently at the moment and is on the market and available. To take that any higher, we all need to work and encourage recycling rates. Robin's point around the food safety aspect, there is very little recycled content that is food grade at the moment, so there would need to be some change in legislation and policy, which we have fed back to HMT as well around that. So we would like to be able to use more recycled content wherever we can, and certainly in anything that we deem is absolutely necessary and would still be a single-use piece of plastic. However, we need to look at what are the complexities that are around that to enable us to do that. So we would encourage that. I think, is there a need to pay more for something if you are already actively doing something is a question. I think I would also ask that within the extended producer responsibility, we look at the additional costs there as well to make sure that anything that we then align with the plastic tax, so there's not a duplication of taxation through the supply chain, or indeed that could be passed on to a consumer.
I guess if I was going to ask a question in a controversial way, I would say, is there any evidence that adding a tax will make you remove plastics any quicker, or is the political and pressure from your consumers already there to make you do that? In which case, is it just a way of raising revenue in a way that's apparently virtue signalling?
I think, if I may, that's why we're acting. Before the consultation on tax was ever even mooted. We have 26 million consumers on the platform. Our customers are deeply passionate about this, and quite frankly, if we didn't take action, we might face a bigger issue of lower demand. And if we can respond to that, then that frankly gives us a competitive advantage as well, because we are acting in their interests, and that's what we're here to do.
Setting the tax at the right level is a huge opportunity. Set the tax at the right level, and we'll do two things. Number one, we will drive people to make different choices on materials. And it's a really important opportunity, and equally at the same time effectively it'll drive innovation in other materials, because it's the opportunity cost. I either sit and pay the tax, or I try to innovate my way to other alternative materials that means I'm not subject to that tax. So this is a huge opportunity if we get the tax at the right level to absolutely both drive change and support innovation and investment in alternatives.
So you think it will drive innovation that wouldn't otherwise happen?
I think it's got the potential to if it's set at the right level.
Okay.
So it makes other materials more competitive then?
Yeah.
But setting the right level, what is the right level?
I suppose that's the $1 million question, as it were, and I think that's in the consultation documents that have come out that we've all fed back on, there's still a lot of unexplored detail around both the level and the actual aspects around the difference between, for example, plastic packaging that's produced and filled in the UK versus plastic packaging that's produced and filled in Europe. There's a real opportunity to make sure we, in the detail, we do this in the right way that will really make a difference.
If I can add, that was the question from Robert Jenrick, was can I not just tax that plastic box? And the simple response was, well, that would end up costing us small, medium businesses, but there is also no alternative. And so that's why we led the call for innovation, because if we can drive that innovation, so yes, tax will support innovation, but it has to be at the right time and there has to be an alternative.
Yeah, I understand that. Karen, one of your answers, you talked about, we've naturally got to move to much more recyclable plastic. But how much is the onus on you as a retailer to know what happens to that recyclable plastic? Because you see, I think in the past we've all been very keen that this is recyclable, so it's excellent. We've had no idea, you as retailers had no idea then what actually happens to that. Did it go to China? Did it go to the Far East? Where did it go? So how much is it the responsibility of you, not just you as Waitrose, retailers generally, and Iceland and others, as to what happens to that recycled plastic, to make sure it does genuinely get recycled?
So I'd say, Mr. Trevor,
because I think the public have woken up to the fact that, just because it says recyclable doesn't mean to say it does actually genuinely get recycled.
So there is the OPRL scheme, the on-packaging recyclability labelling scheme, which, again, likewise with Stuart, actually, we were founding members of that. So it's very, very important to us that we ensure that we label the products correctly and make it easy for our consumers to be able to then put that piece of packaging onto its next journey. As I say, don't like to use the word dispose of necessarily.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely vital that we get that right.
But my question is, yes, you've got to get that right. You've got to get the information to the consumer. But surely it's also a responsibility now for you to know that plastic then is genuinely being recycled. I know it goes through local authorities, it goes through a process very often, but I think there's got to be more onus on the retailer as to what happens to that plastic, because we've used far too much plastic. Now everybody's woken up partly because of it's consumer driven, partly by the fact that the public have worked out that we must quite rightly use much less plastic. It mustn't get in the water, mustn't get in the sea, all of these things. But surely you as retailers are partly to blame, not you personally, but retailers generally are to blame for using as much plastic.
So as part of the producer responsibility, we do have responsibility for the materials and the goods that we're placing on the market. So to your point earlier, Mr. Chairman, we need to remove what we can, and then we need to make sure that we reduce where we can, and we need to make sure we reuse where we can, and then also recycle where we can. The other element to that as well is that we are rethinking a lot of that. But
do you understand my argument? It's not about the process. You see, a lot of this is all process. It's a process of recycling. It's a process of this. It ticks all the right boxes. But to what extent, are the retailers responsible to make sure that in the end, that plastic that was said to be recyclable was actually recycled? It didn't land up in landfill. It didn't get to send to a part of the world where they may not recycle it. You see, I think this is the sort of thing that we need reassurance now. And I think, you need to be able to be clear when you put all the labels on that does actually happen.
So the labelling system is based upon the current infrastructure, so what is actually happening within the UK recycling system. So if it, as Stuart said earlier, there is the 3-tier at the moment. We're encouraging moving to more of a binary labelling system so that it's very clear that either it is recyclable or it is not recyclable. We need to work hand in glove with the recycling and waste management companies to ensure that what we're labelling is correct, what we're providing them with are materials that they can handle so that they don't need to do something else with that. And I think it's about a collaborative piece of work now and going forward even more so to ensure that these materials aren't ending up somewhere that they are not intended to be.
Stuart, you want to make a quick
point? What I'd say to that is, it's with all of that in mind that takes us to the position of saying we've got to turn the tap off, we've got to start using less plastic. I agree with what you're saying, and I think when you look at the National Audit Office research and report into the PRN system, that showed the issue, this complete lack of transparency around where material goes to, and that export market that was just effectively handing it over the wall into
to somebody else's problem.
From our point of view, so all of those complexities and issues are why we want to turn the tap off. We've got direct control over the plastic that we capture within our business. We know where it goes to. We know exactly what happens to it. Once it moves out into the wider system, that's where the NAO report shows that issue. The reform of extended producer responsibility within that is that real opportunity, and it's important for everybody to have that transparency, not just us as retailers, but we've got to be sure, A, what's happening to material, and B, where the money within the system is going, so we can make sure it's being spent appropriately, and that ownership of material, that absolute certainty that says it is being collected, it is being recycled into the right things, is there for everybody to see.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much for that. Alan, please.
Thanks, Neil. Stuart, I think it was yourself that commented earlier that there's so many products on the market, and also that makes it hard for customers to understand what stuff can be recycled and what stuff can, and then further into the mix, different local authorities do different types of collections. So, in amongst that, is there more can be done to actually, in terms of labelling, to make people understand, what can be recycled and how it can be recycled?
I think it's three things. We need fewer materials. We've got to simplify the material mix of what's being used. We've got to simplify the labelling to support that and move to a binary, it's recyclable or it's not, and make it mandatory so it's the same labelling on every single pack that's on sale in the UK, and get rid of the proliferation of other information that is actually isn't backed up. And then the final thing is we've got to make sure that that same communication that comes through for people at home from the local authorities matches that information that's on pack. And if you look in any one of those areas, there's an opportunity to improve versus where we are today. We're not at the mandatory labelling system yet, we're not yet at the binary labelling system, and we still have too many different materials, and we've got actually a lot of the challenge at local authority level is more about the communication feeling different as opposed to people doing different things. Okay. So it's a concerted effort across every aspect of that.
Okay, so when you say mandatory, effectively at some point needs to be a law?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Karen?
Absolutely, we'd support that. So moving to a binary label as soon as possible, so we make it easier for consumers to understand what to do with a material and a piece of packaging. I think the only thing I'd add to Stuart's three elements is that infrastructure needs to align with that as well. So to ensure that what materials are being placed on the market, the fact that they are labelled correctly and clearly, that they are then dealt with in the exact appropriate manner.
Okay. Robin, do you have anything to add?
Not on this.
Sure, if I just get back to yourself, so Which had done an investigation into supermarkets' own label recycling information, checked it for accuracy. So out of 11 supermarkets they looked at, Iceland were bottom of the pile with only 38% of the samples were actually labelled correctly. So
and that's
accept that and what's happened.
That's a good example of the cyclical nature of updating labelling of products. So products, depending on whether they are ambient, chilled, frozen, go through a life cycle, and the labelling is only updated within the context of that life cycle. So you're typically on somewhere between a 1 and 3 year cycle of updating information. Between now and sort of December of this year, we will have changed and updated about 40% of our packaging on shelf. So walking into Iceland today versus walking into Iceland in December this year, you would see a very different picture in terms of our labelling. So absolutely, we're fully committed to making sure that our labelling is up to date, accurate, consistent, but it is right across the packaging sector, that cyclical nature of packaging update. Everybody is in different stages of the cycle.
Right, so if you're at 38% just now, you're saying you've changed labelling about 40%?
About 40% will have changed between,
so it's
38%. Is that 75%?
Well, that's kind of where it's going. So
no, that's 40 out of 100%.
Where's the trajectory?
The target's 100%. Right? The target is absolutely 100%. We want every label on every pack to be right, up to date, consistent, easy to read.
Karen, I noticed Waitrose were fourth bottom of the pile. I think it's maybe about 47%.
Yeah.
So, what steps are Waitrose doing to actually get it correct?
So, similarly to what Stuart has said, there is a cycle for packaging. So, as having 17,000 own label lines, we don't update all of those every year. Obviously, we also wouldn't want to create any further waste or write-off of those packaging goods because a label change takes place. So, we would look to, in the natural cycle of a category or a redesign or a repositioning of a brand, then we would look to update all of the labelling. I believe that a number of the elements that were selected for the report were from a range that we hadn't touched for some time, that we are re-looking at for next year, actually. So it's something we were disappointed by because we tried very hard to ensure that the labelling is correct. But I think as the landscape changes and materials have different classifications, they're not always necessarily aligned together as much as we would like.
Okay, can I ask each of you, how aware were you within your supermarket branding that there was this issue that the labelling wasn't accurate and that it had to be rectified? So it just seems that this came out in the public domain because of which, but you either knew about it and it's taken a long time to do it, or it's came as a surprise to yourselves.
As members of OPRL, we get independent audits of our packaging by OPRL, which paints and gives us that. OPRL? The on-pack recycle labelling system. That's the voluntary system that exists in the UK today. So we go through independent audits as part of that process, which again gives us that update. The challenge is just within that cycle of change, where you're not touching every product every year. And so you have an awareness of things you need to update across a range of aspects, and that's part of it. And we do that against the background of changes in the labelling designations themselves. But we focus so much time on making sure it's really important to us that the information on our packaging is right for our customers. It's absolutely part of everyday the day job for a lot of people, and so for us, until we get to 100%, we keep working on it.
Okay, so through this audit process, you're well aware that this has been an issue, presumably for some time.
The thing to add there is obviously there is much activity going on in this area at the moment. So the material classifications, as Stuart says, are changing. And the necessarily label change doesn't change at the same rate. So it was something that we would be conscious of. So for instance, with labelling, say small flexible pieces of packaging that they can go in with carrier bag recycling in our stores, there's been some changes there around what will be accepted and what won't be accepted. So again, it's just trying to keep all of these things aligned. And with 17,000 own label lines, it is a task. So something that we are aware of, we're conscious of, and we have a desire to ensure that it is better than what it has ever been.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So following up on what Alan said, you see, naturally, as a retailer, you would be confident to label your product, the meat or the apples or the pears, as being exactly what they are, and we as consumers would expect to buy that. So why don't we actually expect the packaging to be labelled properly as well? Surely, to a degree, you are mis-selling, albeit the packaging. And I'm just not sure that you're under 50%, all of you. And you don't seem to be that concerned, really. And yet, why have you got to that situation? Obviously, your eye was off the ball. And you're not giving us any dates to when you're going to get to much higher. I mean, going from 38 to 40%, I don't think you can. Do you expect a pat on the back for that? Or
no, that's we will have touched 40% of our products in totality. So
right.
Our aim is to get to 100%.
But when?
Well, from where we are now, we'll have touched a further 40% of our products by the end of this year. That's a huge scale of change for a business like ours.
So is that 78% altogether, is it? Or what? Is it the 38% you've got now and 40%? I mean, there's too many percentages being, thrown around here. What we want is a total 100%.
Yeah.
So where are you going to be?
When we look at
in total.
Yeah, so when we look at our OPR, the audit that the OPRL does on us as a member of OPRL, and we look at where we are there, our aim there is to be above 90% and that's an audit of all of our products, not a small selection of products,
right?
Which is
by
what
when?
the WIT survey is. Well, by the end of this year, in terms of that process of updating our packaging, we'll be at, from our point of view, the upper end of accuracy.
And Waitrose, where would you be?
So it's not where we would like it to be, of course. Some of the products that are out there won't have been actually updated for between 3 and 5 years. So that's why we have this kind of misalignment. So it's something that we are looking at and we're encouraging to have that updated as soon as possible. And it's one of the reasons why we also support the change to the binary label as quickly as possible, because then again what that will mean is we'll be updating all of our packs, so the level of accuracy will be far, far greater and we'll be at that 100%. So I think with a change like that and it also being mandatory labelling as opposed to voluntary labelling, it will mean that the focus of attention will be far greater. Not that it's not been a focus.
But you see, it does beg the question of why you are in the space you're in. Because, if this pressure hadn't come on from the public and from the desire to have more recycling and less plastics used, I'm not sure, we would be in this position. And so why have you got into that position? Not you, just Iceland and Waitrose. Why generally have we taken the eye off the ball?
I wouldn't say we've taken the eye off the ball.
Well, you wouldn't be in this situation if you hadn't taken the eye off the ball, because we expect to pick up a package of apples or pears or meat and fish and expect it to be what we think's in it. So surely the packaging is also should be accurate. If you don't label the packaging, in some ways that's fair enough, but once you label it, it should actually be accurate.
I absolutely agree with you. It should be accurate and the information that we're giving the consumer should be 100%, and that is what we're looking to get to, and we will do that as quickly as we can.
All right. Sorry, what I would say to that is it's a good example of if you look at information that is legislated and mandatory on pack versus information that's voluntary, and you see, regardless of subject area, two totally different levels of accuracy, completeness and detail on any area, and the sooner we move to a mandatory system, that will drive the checks and balances more completely right the way down through everybody involved in the process. And there's many touch points.
Alan.
Just come back in that. So you both said you're in favour of mandatory labelling, but you admit you've got problems just now. But if mandatory labelling comes in, will there not be an argument and say, well, we'll still need three years or whatever to change our product lines because we can't just change it overnight? So will not still be that, so like you say, you welcome mandatory, will not be some sort of resistance or,
I don't think it's about resistance. I think if you look at any, whether it's about updating information on packaging, whether it's about updating information that local authorities give, that there's a balance to strike between how quickly you're trying to drive change and the cost to implement that change in what you're doing. So that's a natural debate to be had, but we want our labelling to be right today, not in 3 years' time.
Absolutely, and I think with other recent changes with the food information regulations a number of years ago, we had an 18-month period where we needed to update all of our labels to warrant that and to fulfil that. So again, if we have mandatory labelling, it will be re-looked at and it needs to be 100%.
You see, I'm not convinced by your mandatory labelling. I think it should be done, but why should it be mandatory? Why shouldn't you have done it yourselves, you see? I'm sorry. So by sort of saying it must be mandatory, you're almost sort of copping out of the whole thing. And why should consumers be confident when they buy they're getting what you're selling them? Because at the moment they're not on the packaging. And I think, it's similar to the product. Now, it's not as essential, but it will be if we're going to genuinely reduce and recycle more. So I think, you know, you should have done more yourselves. You are putting pressure now, but I think you're putting pressure now because the public's putting pressure on you. And I just wonder why you didn't act sooner. And why mandatory? You know, why pass the buck to the government or anybody else? You are the retailers. We expect you to supply us with good product. Surely that's enough, isn't it?
And I guess we're committed to doing putting labelling on pack and making sure it is accurate, and that's why on a voluntary basis we already do what we do, and that's why on a voluntary basis we're members of the on-pack recycle labelling system, because we're committed to that. Could we have done a better job in terms of the report that was put out by which? Of course we could. When we look at the work we do with OPRL more directly, that gives us a different view on how we're doing at an overall level. But and whilst we could do a better job, yes, until we get 100%, we're not there yet, but we're absolutely committed to doing it. That's why we offer our back our part of this.
All right. Well, you're on record of what you're going to do, and you're going to achieve it by the end of the year. So we will watch you with great interest. Cheryl, number 8, please, and then we'll move on to the next.
Just finally, and I think you've covered some of this, but how do you work with local authorities to improve customer information and labelling?
And the biggest opportunity is to make sure that local authorities have got both the information and the funding to update their labelling and their communication so that it's consistent with the information on packaging. So trying to move to consistent information so that people are getting the same message on their packaging as they're getting from the local authority, but what can or can't be recycled is really important. But it's hard for local authorities to make those changes. They've got lots of competing pressures on what they do with the resources, and the opportunity is through the update to producer responsibility to make sure that all the funding is in place, to make sure we've got really good communication systems and that local authorities have got the funding to do those things. So consistent information both on pack but actually mirrored by what you receive at home.
So do you engage with the local government association, for instance? So you're dealing with all of the local authorities and not individual ones?
Through our membership with OPRL work with both LARIC, the Local Authority Recycling Association, and then LGA as well.
And it's the same for Waitrose as founding members of OPRL, working very closely with the local authorities. Yeah.
Nothing to add to this one.
Thank you.
Just finally on that one it's not your problem, but you see in England you've got so many different local authorities. Some will incinerate, some will do all sorts. Now most of us came up through local government, or not most of us, a lot of us did, and so therefore we want the autonomy that local government's got. But on the other hand, if you move from local authority, I mean what we recycle up here in London is you know, and where we put it is totally different to what we do back in Somerset and Devon. So, you know, how do we get to a situation where the consumer can understand what the local authorities are doing better? Can you put pressure on local authorities, or what?
I think when you see in the consultation document on achieving consistent household collections, that sets out the framework to make sure that that balance between autonomy and having a consistent set of materials that are collected everywhere, somewhere along the way, tries to strike that balance. And then extended producer responsibility sets out to put the funding in place to support that.
Likewise.
Absolutely, yes, what Stuart's already said. But then again, the labelling piece, we need to make sure we've got that accurate as well.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Very good evidence session. We've got plenty to put into our inquiry and plenty on record. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you'd like to retire from the panel, we'll invite the second panel up. Thank you very much. Gentlemen, Nick, if you'd like to introduce yourself and go across the panel, please.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair, and good morning, committee. Thank you for the opportunity to come and talk today. My name is Nick Brown. I'm the head of sustainability for Coca-Cola European Partners in Great Britain. Coca-Cola European Partners is a company that manufactures and distributes products for the Coca-Cola Company and other brand owners in Great Britain. We're delighted to be here today. We are at a great point of time where we've got a great opportunity to help shape the policies that will improve recycling for the next 10 years or so, and delighted to go into more detail on the written response we've given.
Fine, that'll come out through questioning. Right, Andy, please. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Sweetman from the Bio-Based and Biodegradable Industries Association, and the job that pays me is I work for Futamura up in Cumbria, where we manufacture renewable and compostable packaging films.
Right, thank you.
Barry Turner. I work for the British Plastics Federation. I've spent over 30 years in the packaging supply chain, working companies manufacturing both packaging machinery and also packaging materials.
Right, okay, well thank you very much, gentlemen. So my first question is fairly straightforward. When is plastic food and drink packaging necessary, and when are alternative materials better? And I'll add another part to it. You know, why have we got ourselves into this situation? Is it because plastic was very cheap? I don't know who wants to start with that one.
Sure. I'll go first with that one, if you like, Mr. Chair. Obviously, the use of packaging materials serves a purpose because supermarkets and retailers don't buy packaging, they sell goods, and packaging has a purpose in terms of protecting those goods and making sure they arrive in the consumer's home in a fit state to be consumed. Why has plastics grown in the way that it has and become such a popular choice? It's grown because it's very resource efficient. If you look at any metrics from an LCA point of view, uses the least resources possible in the process. It's much lighter than the other materials typically in use, and it has lower impacts in terms of, most importantly, emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. So it's very flexible. It can be used for packaging fresh foods and control the rate of moisture loss, and in a way that ensures that we can consume our food when it suits us, really, because we all live busy lives, and I don't know about most people, but I'm down here today. I was here yesterday. I'll be going back to my home later in the week, and when I get home...
I accept it's a very good product and it does its job, but like I said, how have we got to a situation where over the last 20, 30 years it's virtually taken over the world, and of course then we've had all the problems with it getting into our rivers and water?
Variety of factors that I've mentioned, because it does such a good job in terms of making sure that we can consume when we want to consume. It's convenient, and that's a lifestyle thing. So it's been responding, and the retailers and everyone's been responding to the way that we live our lives, and the material, because it is so versatile, has been able to respond to that situation. We can always look at what we would have done differently as we went through these journeys, and certainly you touched earlier on reuse and things like that. There are plenty of opportunities to innovate further. So
that probably is a good chance to bring Andy in. So, what are the alternatives? Because I accept we've got to make sure that food is safe. We've got to try and keep its shelf life as long as possible. We don't want extra food waste, but we do want less plastics, and we do want less non-recyclable and single-use plastic. So, what's the solution then?
Well, I would endorse what Barry said in terms of the actual technical performance of plastic materials in a packaging context. They are the reference point. The kind of materials which I represent are the fruit of recent research and development. They didn't really exist 15 years ago, and they're evolving all the time. So if you go back a couple of years, we couldn't produce the same level of moisture barrier properties or gas barrier properties as a conventional plastic.
Right.
Now, in many, many cases, we can. But there are exceptions. So, for example, if you said to me, should we be making a water bottle or a drinks bottle out of a biomaterial, I would be saying no, because they don't have the right functional performance, and actually they'll probably get in the way of an existing recycling infrastructure. So we see our materials actually being a key element of the future of the wider plastics industry, and then fitting into key application areas where we solve a problem. The last thing we want is to get in the way of a good system, wherever there is a good recycling system.
Just very quickly, how do you, it's difficult, how do you stop the sort of contamination between the mineral plastic, oil-based plastic, and your more compostable and biodegradable plastic? How do you stop that happening?
Sure. For us, the key thing is around labelling. So, to a degree, we aspire to make our materials look transparent like a plastic in many, many cases, and that can cause some confusion. So the key thing is around labelling. And I know you've had a debate earlier on about mandatory versus voluntary. From my perspective, whether it's mandatory or voluntary, I don't really care. What we need to see is a harmonised labelling system which we can all, within our industries, adhere to, and that allows us to make that differentiation effectively.
So, Nick, from your point of view, I suppose, with bottles, then yours is mainly trying to get to a situation of genuinely recycling that bottle rather than a biodegradable, compostable plastic.
Yes, on the issue specifically of biodegradable
or do you
plastics.
Go to glass, or what do you do?
Well, it might be interesting for the committee to know that we still use more glass packaging in Great Britain than we do anything else, and we sell nearly twice as many cans as we do plastic bottles. So any area that any policies and any work that we do on sustainable packaging, it's really important that it works across the various different packaging formats. In terms of the bioplastics question specifically, as Andy said, we've looked at material called PLA, which is a biodegradable plastic, but it didn't have the functionality we need. It basically didn't keep the carbonation in the product. So we'll keep looking and innovating, and we'll keep working with groups. But just to reiterate, you do need to make sure it's kept separately and doesn't damage the recycling streams. You need to make sure that you're not giving a rationale for someone to litter the package as well. So on that consumer engagement point of view, you've really got to make sure that it's communicated clearly.
When we go to the supermarket, we buy sort of 4 or 5 bottles or 6 bottles, all wrapped in plastic usually. When we buy cans, they're all connected together by plastic. Do we need to do that?
So actually, our larger multi-packs are packed in cardboard rather than plastic films. But the smaller ones are in plastic films, and we're going through an assessment at the moment to look at how we can transition to board, and we will do that.
And one of my pet subjects is plastic-coated cardboard as well. Is that necessary? Because you see, if you're not careful, you're going to go from one thing to another. I think we really have got to sort of look at this whole thing in the round. So do you look at that as well?
We do. So
it looks flashy, you see, with all the coloured photographs on it. But do we need that?
So that's not a pack format that we use. We've got a commitment to use 100% recyclable packaging, as well as a target to recover all the packaging that we use, so that more can be recycled and none ends up as litter. And we think it's really important that if you want to encourage a circular economy, you need to have good eco-design principles, and that's one of the things we hope will come through very clearly in industry's responses to the EPR consultation.
Right.
Because we think
Barry,
that's a great
do you want to come
opportunity.
back quickly?
Yeah, just on the coated board, I think we do have to be careful that we don't forget about the functionality of the packaging. A number of reasons why coated board might be used in some applications that are in contact with food are very good reasons. So, but then there is a challenge: how do you separate that plastic from the board and don't end up with a format that is less recyclable?
That's right. That's my point. We don't want to jump out of the frying pan into the fire just because it looks like it ticks the right box. You see.
Indeed,
and that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of in this inquiry, really.
And there is a real risk, I think, in the I applaud the efforts of people to highlight the issues that we definitely need to deal with, but there is a danger that people jump out of one material into another, and there are unintended consequences. So, just as a matter of interest, I think we talked about the amount of plastics, but in terms of our waste stream, if you look at our total waste that we generate as a nation, it's 2%, and if you look at the amount of packaging that we use, it's 20%. A lot of people would think, and that's based on weight clearly, but that demonstrates its function. Some of the
of course,
benefits.
plastic is very light, of course.
Indeed,
indeed. So therefore, that masks a little bit of the actual.
But for very good reasons. It uses less energy to produce it, less carbon emissions.
Carry on the lorry, and there's less of an environmental impact.
Exactly.
You're doing a good job to try and sell your plastic. I'll give you that, but I think we do need to reduce it, and I think you accept that. Cheryl, please.
Have packaging producers focused too much on reducing weight of plastic packaging rather than reducing the actual numbers of packaging items produced? So
well, a very good question. The waste hierarchy obviously starts with you should focus on reduction, and that's one of the ways that you reduce by lightweighting. So I don't think they've been wrong to focus on that because resource efficiency and the way we consume resources across the planet should be at the top of everyone's priority list. I think where we touched on it earlier, we need to do better is making sure we close that loop at the end of the circle. But I don't think they've done anything wrong by focusing on reducing, because that's the start of the journey. That's it. But we shouldn't sacrifice functionality and or food waste in that journey, or indeed our opportunity to recapture the resource at the end of its life.
I would agree with that. I think we've seen a lot of that over the last 10 years or so, a reduction in the thickness of materials and so on. I think where we are now is that it's a fundamental review. So if I take one example I'm close to, we have a development where a customer is changing their pack formats so that they can take their plastic film out wherever possible, and where they can't, where it's absolutely required, they're switching that into biodegradable and compostable film with the same thicknesses and weights that they've already got. So we're going on to the next level now, but it's certainly happened over the last few years.
And can I ask you, Nick, I mean, you clearly are doing your best to use cans and glass bottles. Have you got any plans to actually phase out plastic bottles? What's the purpose of plastic bottles?
So there are two main reasons that we use plastic bottles in the beverage industry. Excuse me. One is around safety. So the idea of using a glass bottle or an aluminium can in many applications isn't practical. And the other one is the environmental impact that Barry mentioned. The environmental impact of a plastic bottle rather than an aluminium drinks can is maybe around half, and it's the same for our glass bottles. So a wholesale move from plastics into one of the existing alternatives is not necessarily the right long-term solution. Where we are looking at different models is things like how could we use refillable packaging, what's the right refillable packaging for the 21st century. Those are and some of those will still use plastic as a material because it's got some very, very useful properties.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So how practical would it be, you know, a bit like we're going to have water fountains in all our towns, which we had for years and we don't anymore. So how practical would it be to come to the big retailer with a Coca-Cola bottle and refill your Coca-Cola bottle?
Well, one of the things I have brought along today is what we've been using increasingly across Great Britain, which is a refillable bottle that has got a tag in the bottle, so it's charged up a bit like an Oyster card, and a consumer will buy one of these, and then they will use that to buy their soft drinks. And I've got water in mine today, but with our smart dispensers it could be any of the products from the Coke range. And we've been doing that at Reading University, and we've also been doing it at some other festivals and events, because what we need to understand is how consumers are going to respond to refillable packaging. It is a new way, it is a different way.
And how are you finding them?
Well, our really initial findings were that you have to work really hard on communications. So what we found was that many people, when given that choice, might still decide to buy their product from a cup. Also, others liked the convenience of the plastic bottle or the can and were buying the product elsewhere and bringing it onto the sites where we did it. So what we've learned and what we've evolved is the second phase of the programme, which has spent a lot more time explaining the concept, explaining the commercial and the environmental benefits of it. And interestingly, we had to address some of the same concerns that were raised in the previous panel about health and safety and
how clean is the bottle,
and so we put in place wash stations and things like that.
Right. Okay. Very interesting. Right, Alan, please now. Question number 3.
Thanks, Neil. I have to. In terms of recycling, there's actually different organisations put out different statistics, so it's really hard to actually get a handle on what percentage of plastics are recycled, how much plastic food and drink packaging is actually recycled. And then there's other dynamic that the Chair touched on earlier on, is how much is recycled in the UK and how much is actually exported, and then what happens to it once it's exported. So there's quite a few variables there. I don't know if you want to have a stab.
Shall I lead on that? I mean, there shouldn't be confusion. The DEFRA figures and the way that they are assembled show a recycling rate for plastics. That does include exports, and it shows a rate that is widely available there for everyone to see. In terms of the export, certainly. We do rely on exports too much, or around about 60-odd% has traditionally gone to export markets. I think one of the good things that, if you can call it good, that's been highlighted is that for a long time we've been saying to government now, since around about 2012, that there needs to be tighter controls around this area. And now we've seen the consequences of not having tighter controls around the export of our waste. Most recently featured on BBC TV.
Can I just check? So you're saying you're saying the government needs to be tighter controlled. So therefore, it's government fault and not the industry and.
No, everyone's got a part to play. When government puts legislation in place, any sort of legislation, there's got to be an enforcement regime. That enforcement regime we've supported as an industry. We've provided information to about where they should look to see and audit. And regretfully, the fact of the matter is we've now seen that maybe that regime needed tightening up somewhat. So we have a recycling rate of 46%, two-thirds, roughly 2/3 of it at the moment is reliant on exports, which is something that we did not want to see as an industry. It's something has resulted in a lack of infrastructure and investment in the UK. And what we're pleased about with the current consultations is we might actually see some attempts to rectify that now and direct some money into the infrastructure that's needed in the UK.
It's a real challenge for us getting hold of valid data to help us drive the right decisions. So the current producer responsibility scheme, whilst it obligates companies to report what they've put on the market, they only have to report it at a reasonably high level, so plastics. So you don't know what type of plastic it is, what type of application. And there's no obligation on those that reprocess to actually explain and report how much they've reprocessed. So it is a real failing in the current system, and it's something that I think many in industry have fed back. We certainly have, as to one of the main things we have to get right in the new schemes to make sure that reporting obligation is clear. In terms of the role of government, the waste and resources touches so many different parties, so the packaging producers, the retailers, the consumers, local authorities, waste management companies, and there does need to be a mechanism for joining those all together so that they can collaborate in the right way, because that's where you get the proper data from. You need the data from everyone to be able to map what's really happening.
Thanks. But I see you're kind of nodding agreement with what Nick was saying. Now, fundamentally, Nick's saying there's not clear data and it's difficult for you as an organisation. But yet, initially you said there's clear available figures for recycling that's readily available. So
there's lots of data out there. There's lots of data in terms of even split by polymer type. Valpac do a lot of work in conjunction with RAP to identify the split of the data. So there's lots of data out there. Could the data be better? Always. But I mean, I think it's, it was quite obvious from the recent investigative TV programme that a reporter could actually even identify where some waste had come from and went to by looking at waste flow data. So there's lots of data out there. It's how it's used at the moment. Could it be improved? Yes. We put that in our submission and some suggestions as to where it could be further improved. There's lots of data there already, I would suggest. We're not using it terribly well.
Okay.
I think the only thing I would add to that is that we've got to get beyond just looking at collection rates. We need to get down to what is recycling rates as well as collection rates. And they are not the same thing as we've come to see.
Okay, thanks.
Because I've got to put the same fairly hard question to you that I did to the retailers. Isn't it more responsibility when you manufacture to know that actual product is going to be recycled properly if it says so? You see, it's no good just putting it on your packaging. It ticks the box. In the end, it lands up in China or somewhere in the Far East in landfill or whatever.
Well, again, it comes back to how we operate. All packaging is produced on an international scale. I mean, we import as a country 50% of the packaging that we use in this country. 50.
Yeah.
And that's a function of the way that brands operate. So if we're going to move towards universal labelling, one of the things that you've got to bear in mind, these brands are working across the whole of Europe. The whole of the world in some cases, but if we just narrow down to Europe, even though we're about to exit that stage, the fact of the matter is... We've got
this far this morning without mentioning the BBIA. So,
yeah, I know, sorry, I apologise, Chairman.
Okay, that's all right. Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, it's if you look at the rest of Europe, we are in a minority in terms of what we collect. When it comes to plastics. We are part of the third that are not doing a very good job in terms of the collection of plastics for recycling. That's why we need this consistent approach to the collection of because if you don't collect it, you can't even begin to recycle it.
You accept, you as the manufacturers, along with the retailers, have got to sort of put more pressure on the whole system to make it work.
We are working with the Plastic Pact and organisations like the retailers and the brands to move along that journey. Right. we fully support that direction of travel. All I'm saying is it's not.
But you are putting pressure to do it rather than being reticent to move from your plastic packaging that you are so keen on.
There'd be something wrong if I wasn't keen on it. It's about time to leave the industry.
See where I'm coming from. Yeah.
No, but the fact of the matter is, all the resources we put on this that we use on our journey through life have to be minimised. Plastics offers a real opportunity to do that if we treat it in the right way, recapture it and put it back to use again. Yeah. That's the main challenge, I think, that everyone needs to face up.
And you would agree with that, Andy?
I would agree. I think the biggest change I've seen over the years is being a packaging technologist, people would always ask me the technical properties of the material. And environmentally, amongst our customer base, that was of secondary and very minor importance. Now it's right at the forefront. So it's the first question alongside the technical performance questions. So that has led the manufacturers to make those changes and to change the thinking.
So commercial pressure has
commercial pressure has changed dramatically, and thank goodness.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Kerry, please.
Okay, and this is probably one to start with Barry on, about curbside collections and the fact that there's so many different schemes operating. I think there's over 300 different schemes operating. I know DEFRA, I think going back to the days when Rory Stuart was Minister, he was particularly keen on trying to rationalise that. How big a problem is that, the fact that there's so much inconsistency as to what's collected where and what's done with it?
Well, I'm going to, if I may, I'll use an example of Wales in terms of the recycling rate that they've achieved. They've managed to achieve that through a consistent approach to collection of materials. They're now the third in the world in terms of recycling performance.
And is that consistent across the whole of Wales then?
It is virtually there. They've taken a consistent approach. They've put money behind it to reward councils who move to that consistent approach. They've put the right infrastructure in place, and the results are showing. I think the most recent stats I saw for Wales for all recycling were 57%. I think England's 45%. That shows what an impact a consistent approach can have, and that's why we are so keen on a consistent approach. It doesn't confuse the consumer. They know what they can do. It's more consistent with the approach of best practice in Europe, and that's the direction of travel we need to take.
And with Wales, did they you say the government invested in it, did they have to put money into buying out contracts, or because one of the Environmental Audit Committee did an inquiry into single-use plastics, and one of the things we heard was that some of the contracts would be 20, 25 years long, so it's very difficult to you can't just switch to somebody else that does it.
Indeed, it does take time, but that's why the Welsh Government, and this is what I hope EPR will do when it's revised, will actually speed that process up, because collection contracts typically are 7 years. So, there is a period of time that's needed before you can transition that. Obviously, all councils are at different stages with those collection contracts. Disposal contracts can be a lot longer. So it is a challenge, but at least the government has recognised now that it's a challenge that must be tackled, and we fully support it as an industry, because it's the only way you will ever move to optimal levels of collection and recycling.
Because we're not going to meet the 2020 targets.
Sorry.
I don't think the England's going to meet its 2020
England's not,
targets.
that's why we certainly, as a trade organisation and a membership organisation, are looking at what we can do, and by bringing the whole logistics chain together in the interim, because there's an argument that says we can't really wait until the EPR system is revised.
Yeah. Does anyone
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with what you've just heard. Again, the complementarity between a conventional plastic for recycling and a biomaterial for recycling via organic recycling methods. We need consistency across the country. and we need simple labelling so that the consumer simply knows that's a conventional plastic, I do this with it, that's a biomaterial or food waste and whatever, and I do that with it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many local authorities at the moment can differentiate between recyclable plastic of a mineral kind, of oil kind, and a compostable one?
Well, I think the reality is almost no one.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why it's critical that industry has a role to play. Absolutely, our association is ready to engage with all stakeholders in the conventional plastics industry on this, and the waste management and the local authorities by whatever vehicle is possible. We have to do that. If we get the labelling right and we have the infrastructure right, it's not difficult to do.
Basically, it's consistency throughout in terms of the fewer variations there are in terms of the products that are out there, and particularly mixed use. That's the real pain,
Yes.
isn't it, when you've got like the sleeves on drinks bottles and so on. So you need as much consistency as possible, then consistent, clear labelling so
Yes.
people know what to do, and then consistency in terms of the recycling collections.
That's right.
So that people know wherever they are in the country whether something's recyclable or not.
That's right, and one of the things that I know that our association and the BPF have talked about is applications. So if you because it's easier to think for a consumer point of view about this is a bottle, I know what to do with a drinks bottle, than it is to start talking about PVCs and polystyrenes and PPs and whatever. They all look the same. So if you concentrate on the applications, you can make life much easier. So for example, we've all gone coffee mad over the last few years, so now you've got lots of coffee capsules. If you've got a readily recyclable coffee capsule, recycle it. If you've got a compostable coffee capsule, great, because let's face it, the contents is 25 grams of coffee and just 4 grams of capsule. What you shouldn't have is what we have a lot of at the moment in this country, which is a conventional plastic holding food waste that you can't do anything with. So let's really think about the applications together. Which application makes most sense for which type of material? And actually, when we get down to it, there's a lot of commonality in our views on that.
When you say, let's think about this and we need to do this, how does that happen? Is it just the market responding, businesses, organisations like the one you represent responding, or is there something that needs to be done to either make this happen or encourage it, nudge it along a bit further?
Yeah.
Because there'll be a lot of companies that are just basically interested in the prime thing that they'll care about is whether their product looks good, whether it's going to make people buy it, whatever. So how do we get that consistency if it's not government saying you must do it this way?
Right. Well, very very briefly, from the compostable point of view, we need labelling, and we have proposals on a simple label system that is harmonised with the OPRL systems we've heard earlier. We need that to be recognised by consumers and the waste industry, and then we need a bit of joined up approach in terms of the actual composting and organic recycling infrastructure. So, for example, in the UK, we're very strongly down the anaerobic digestion route only, or composting. The model actually is to link the two together, to combine AD with traditional in-vessel composting, as is done, by the way, in the Maltings in Selby in the UK. Both systems put together, which means that you get the energetic value from the waste and the food waste, and then you get the secondary soil remediation benefit from the composting phase. And all compostable materials are suitable when you do that.
Because I think you'd accept that if you get too much of compostable plastic mixed with non-compostable plastic, you're actually making it more difficult to recycle.
Yes, I mean, there's a bit of a misconception that compostables are getting in the way of plastics. I wish our industry was big enough to do that.
Yeah.
We're not, in reality. We're an emerging industry.
But you will be.
Categorically,
you will be if you emerge, and that's why we've got to have a separation, haven't we?
Categorically, we do not want to interfere with any good recycling system. And if there was, for example, a voluntary code of conduct that said we should not be involved in plastic drinks bottles, our industry would sign up to that wholeheartedly.
Right. Okay. Question number 5, please, Caroline.
Thank you. My question is really about labelling and who you think is responsible for ensuring that it's properly labelled so the customer has the information they need.
Well, in terms of who?
In terms of, obviously in terms of food packaging, but who do you think is responsible or should be responsible for ensuring that the labelling is done properly? Do you think it should be mandated? And if so, upon whom?
Well, I think it comes back to collaborative effort across the supply chain. That's the most important thing that I would say that has emerged from the current debate, that people are now talking to each other much more than that perhaps they've ever done before. I'm not saying that was right, that there wasn't enough collaboration, but the fact of the matter was there needed to be more. And some of the challenges that we face in terms of separation of materials and sorting of materials, I would suggest there's innovation required there as well. Because although labelling can help, we are dealing with people who are living busy lives, and you've got to have a fallback. And it's not beyond, I would suggest, the wit of man to come up with ways of actually identifying products in such a way that they don't contaminate different streams. And you touched on black plastics earlier. Even that problem was solvable. Yes. But we've got an infrastructure that is very conservative, not wanting to invest, and we've got to break through that and make sure that the right investments are there, the right labelling's there, the right sorting and separation's there. It's a combination of all those things. So, although labelling will help, you'll still need another stage.
So what you're saying, if I understand it right, is that the recycling factory processing the waste will be able to find a technological solution to separate all these things. It doesn't matter. But that's not going to happen overnight. And in the meantime, the information on what the packaging contains is already available, but not provided. And I understand what you're saying about everyone needs to do it collaboratively. But my experience as a paediatrician tells me that children have more accidents when lots of people are looking after them than when one person is. Because when one person is, they're entirely responsible. Otherwise, people think somebody else is doing it. So the same is true of labelling. If it's not somebody's specific responsibility, is it going to happen?
It will happen, in my view. It will happen, is happening, and all people have got to take into consideration is that labelling actually, number one, reflects not worst practice, but where we need to be, and we don't want barriers to innovation. So either you've got to have a labelling scheme that is very responsive. We live in the age of apps and things like that. We've got to get smarter at the way we communicate with consumers. The apps that I've seen around labelling should give us an opportunity to make it very, very regional, very reflective of what's available in that area, and it can be updated. But if we rely on, sort of printing labels all the time and updating old labelling formats, I think we'll find we'll probably need a smarter technology than that to allow us to innovate and really tackle the problem.
And how will you innovate people using plastic who don't have smartphones?
Sorry?
People who don't use apps, don't use the
Well,
internet.
there's always got to be a fallback, hasn't there? Because not everyone's got a smartphone. I totally accept that. But all I'm saying is... Or wants one, maybe not. We probably rely on those far too much, but the reality is I think that they are in common use, and we should be using them more to communicate than important information about where you can recycle stuff. Make it easy for consumers, because I think a lot of this challenge with consumers is we've made it far too complicated for them. All they want to know is, can I recycle that or not? Where I live right now, and that's a challenge, and that's why you can't have one labelling system that goes right across the country.
Is that really accurate though? Because if you had a labelling system that said it's X type, this is X type of product, and then the council provide the information on which type of products are recyclable, they can compare the label on the product to the information they've received from their local district council, and then say, yes, this is the type of plastic that I can stick in that bin, no, it's not, I'll put it in the other one. That's not terribly complicated, is it? It doesn't require an app.
Well, there is information like that available from councils at the moment, what you can and cannot recycle. Everyone's got that if they choose to access that information. I think I come back to the busy lives that people live, and we've got to make it easier for them. And when we've got consistent collections, when we're collecting what we should be collecting for recycling, it'll be an awful lot easier. We're just in that sort of transition phase at the moment, that awful phase where it's taken a long time to get a consistent approach to collections on the table. It's now on the table, thank goodness. You know, we will get to a consistent collection of recyclable materials. Then we can have the labelling, and it can be on the product then. But we're in that awful phase of transition, I'm afraid.
Any other thoughts on labelling?
Well, I think those are the issues. Identification, labelling critical, and a simple, whether it's mandated or voluntary, one system that we all adhere to throughout the whole of the industry is key. One thing that may help with misthrows, which I think is what you're talking about, that we're seeing emerging in terms of technology, is a way of having a kind of chemical marker inside the packaging that can actually be picked up at the waste management phase. So let's imagine you put a compostable into a classic plastic application. As it runs through, its chemical marker will then mean that it's pulled out. And there are technologies emerging on this through the Ellen MacArthur Foundation projects, which on a lab level are working. Obviously, it needs to be scaled up and fully practical and cost-effective. But technically, there are things that can be done.
Fairly expensive at the moment, I imagine.
Absolutely, it's an emerging technology.
Yeah.
And our view on engaging consumers is labelling is absolutely an important place to do it. You need a very technical message that says, is it very technical? It's quite precise, it doesn't need to be overly long or complicated, about whether it can be recycled where you are in the kinds of facilities. The on-pack recycling label does that, but what we found and feedback from our consumers was there was still some confusion, and the question often was, well, why, what's the benefit, what happens to it when it is recycled. So in terms of engaging more members of the public to use the services that we've got, I think labelling is one important place, but there are many others as well. And so we've put more messaging on our label, on our products alongside the OPRL, but it's also important that whatever reform of the producer responsibility scheme comes, sufficient money is put aside not just to mandate the labelling rules, but also to engage at that more emotional level as to why consumers should engage with the services that are provided.
Okay.
Thank you.
Just on the green dot. Green dot does not necessarily mean that the packaging is recyclable. It signifies that the producer of the has made a financial contribution towards recovery and recycling of packaging in Europe. So if I saw a green dot on something, I would expect that to be recyclable. So is that green dot necessary? Is it confusing? Should we change it?
I think it comes back to the earlier point. The brands operate on a territorial basis. They don't, unfortunately, operate on a UK-only basis. And what we do in terms of infrastructure around plastics in particular, in terms of what we collect, should reflect best practice in Europe. And at the moment, we're in that third poor category where could do better, I think, is the record. Because,
right, so therefore, using the B word again after Brexit, we could alter the labelling if we wanted to.
You could try and take the brands in that direction.
Right.
I would suggest it might be better to actually look at best practice in Europe, which I think we're doing now through these consultations,
right,
and take that journey and get that consistency in collection and drive the material through.
Okay, all right, we'll park it there because we're conscious of time. Alan, please, question number 6, please.
And this question's directed just at yourself. So, in terms of composting packaging, is that any better for the environment than recyclable plastics? Because there is consumers might throw them in the wrong bin. We heard earlier on from Waitrose where they're looking at home composting, but in actual fact that product needs to be in a compost bin at 40 degrees centigrade for X weeks, so that, So it's just to ask the specifics of that versus recyclable.
Okay, well, the first thing to say, I think Karen's talking about optimised home composting conditions. Home compostable materials don't need that. If it's warmer, they'll go quicker. That's the key difference. Home composting we view as being an interesting stepping stone right now while we sort out the infrastructure and logistics issues. But for us, it's about having a proper organic recycling system in the UK that any compostable material which has passed the key standard is suitable for, and that's how we actually turn this into a proper waste management process and not just the short-term stepping stone towards it. In terms of composting versus recycling, I'm coming back to what I said before really, which is recycle materials where it's practical to do so. Let's do more of it, absolutely. Where you've got high levels of food contamination, or where it's a very small format material like a sweet wrapper, or where you've got coffee pods and so on, any area where you've got high levels of food contamination, that's where compostable, organically recyclable materials come into their own. And in that sense, they're just complementary to good use of plastic in the right places.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, the final one on that is that surely it is absolutely essential, again, to get it in the right bin,
yes,
and then to be collected separately, yes, because otherwise, it could be counterproductive. I think you would accept that.
It is, and
we're just not there at the moment, are we?
No, we're not. But actually, we don't think it's rocket science in terms of, as we move already towards greater food waste collections, our vision is simply to say, if it's got the right logo on, it's recycle with food waste for those type of materials. So a small flyaway food, let's say a twist wrapped sweet, for example.
Yeah, it goes straight into the food.
Put it into
waste.
the food waste, away
Right.
it goes, and it's easy for the consumer and it's clear. Recycle with food waste. So again, if it's not the right material for that, identify it for proper recycling, as we need to do. They're complementary materials.
Getting it, sort of making sure the consumer does it right, because otherwise if you put it into the food waste and then it's not compostable, then that's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think one way of doing it, if when we have the food waste bins, which are happening more and more, we have a recycle logo that says food waste. Let's use that type of logo directly on the packaging as well, and then it's here we go.
Back to the argument of some consistency of labelling, basically,
exactly,
so that it can be easily recognisable.
Exactly.
Okay, you done, Alan? Right. On the is the 30% threshold for recycled content in the plastic packaging tax going to make a difference to the packaging produced? Should there be a modulated fees for different amounts of recycled content? Does Barry want to go that one?
I think the plastics tax, in terms of a stated objective, is well intentioned. I think it's as you heard earlier, it's got some challenges. We are heavily dependent on imported packaging in this country. 30% of all the packaging we use is pre-filled. That part of the equation is not going to suffer a tax, which means that it will favour imports over home-produced packaging or the filling of that packaging. That will have consequences in our belief. We think that there might be some movement of jobs overseas to exploit that loophole. The tax also is a fairly blunt instrument because we know that in certain formats you can achieve more than 30%. In other formats you can't achieve any percent because of food contact issues. Right. So from a point of view of will it work, will it drive investment where it's needed, or will it just pass unnecessary costs on to consumer, I think there's a real risk that it will fall into.
So your argument, it's got to be a lot more thought through than it is at the moment?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Is that Andy's view?
I'd agree. I mean, our industry believes in extended producer responsibility on this aspect, absolutely. We want to see the infrastructures come into place, we want to contribute and play our part in that. I think the 30% recycled content is very difficult. As a film manufacturer, we simply can't do it. We would never have food contact regulations passed if we actually did that, because we don't know the origin of that recycled content, even if we could use it. So I think it's not necessarily the right instrument, but the need for our industry to pay our way in this, we absolutely endorse.
Okay. And then just very quickly, because I know Alan needs to go, to Nick, why should glass and HDPE bottles be managed through extended producer responsibility rather than a deposit scheme?
So we're involved in lots of deposit return schemes around the world. What we find when glass and HDPE, which is typically used for milk, when they're included in a deposit return scheme, the complexity of collecting them, so the actual return points in the retailers, are more complicated. So you need more space and more specialist equipment if you're going to work with glass, and also there's hygiene concerns over milk and therefore HDPE. The other issue is that glass can often contaminate the other materials. So whereas you can easily collect cans and PET bottles together and separate them, if you start mixing in glass, you can often end up with shards of glass in there, which is a real problem for it handling further on. So we think that the best way of improving recycling of glass and HDPE is through the household schemes with a properly funded EPR scheme.
And is Coca-Cola doing the reverse vending machine for plastic bottles? Or?
Yes, so as well as those schemes that we're involved in around the world, we've been doing some testing and some trialling in Great Britain with the Merlin Group, which is...
and is it working?
Yeah, what we're finding is people are very excited, very interested about it, and we've used it to get across the message of why recycling is important. The other thing that you learn from the tests and trials is how do the machines work, how do they need to be maintained, how do you empty them, how reliable are they? So I think that's one of the reasons we're doing it. I know that's one of the reasons lots of the retailers are doing it as well, to see when we do have a deposit return scheme, how are we well prepared to know some of the operational challenges that will need to be overcome.
Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen, very much. It's your evidence is very fitted in very well with the first evidence we had from retailers this morning. So we look forward to taking your evidence, and it will make part of our report when done. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.